Coming up next on City Corner, we talk with the oldest civil rights organization in the country. Please join us to learn more about this organization and how you can get involved. Welcome to City Corner. I'm your host, Melanie Adams. Today, we're talking to the NAACP, the oldest civil rights organization in the country. I think recently they just celebrated their 100th anniversary, and joining me to talk about the NAACP and all they do in the St. Louis community is the president of the local chapter, Adolphus Pruitt. Thank you for joining me.
How you doing?
Good, good. Tell us a little bit about the NAACP and their history here in St. Louis.
The NAACP in St. Louis actually has a very unique history. Back in 1914, a gentleman by the name of Joe Spingard was the chairman of the national NAACP, and he came to speak at the City of St. Louis Club for a luncheon. Decided that he needed to do more to promote the fact that there need to be branches of the NAACP growing all over the country. Spoke at St. Paul Church that night of January the 19th, 1914. But the unique thing happened was at Union Memorial Church the very next morning. People got together and decided it was time for an NAACP branch in St. Louis. They elected, actually, the first president of the St. Louis branch of the NAACP was a white guy. Was it? Okay. And then everybody else on the other officers and executive committee turned out to be blacks. And they formed a branch, and then by a year later, there were over 1,000 members of in the St. Louis community, active and strong within the St. Louis branch of the NAACP.
Oh, wonderful. So essentially, we started just a few years after the national. Now, where were we in terms of other cities, other urban areas in having NAACP chapters?
On the major urban areas, there probably were about 20 to 40 chapters across the country at that point in time. So we were, St. Louis came right at the level where the NAACP was starting to take off and really starting to grow. And so we were a leading edge member of the organization, at that point in time.
What were some of those early issues? What were they talking about when they first started in 1914?
Believe it or not, some of the same issues we're struggling with today.
That's not good.
Housing segregation was a critical issue. The disparities in employment opportunities for African American was still a pressing issue. Police brutality, people being locked up for thrown in jail for the wrong reasons.
So a lot of the same issues. So a lot of the issues that we're facing today, they were facing back then.
Unfortunately, they were a little bit more pronounced back then, but based on the size of our population, they were just as critical as they are today.
Well, I think it's interesting. When I went to the National's website, and the organization is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, what they actually have on their website really talks about civil rights. And I think that was a little bit of a surprise for me because I thought it would focus more on issues of the African American community, which I know it does, but it really does talk about civil rights and how the organization fights for people's civil rights.
And actually, under our new president, Ben Jealous, we've actually started moving more towards human rights.
Oh, okay.
And that was strategic in nature. But yeah, we are a civil rights organization, and actually in St. Louis, one of my focuses is to get us refocused on dealing with civil rights, because at this point in time, the most critical issue impacting the city overall is the discussion, or at least the lack of advancement for a large portion of this population, which is the African American population.
Well, one of the things I noticed you do, you did mention your national president. You have a national president that's fairly young. I think he's under 40, or at least close to 40. How has that really changed or energized the organization?
And our chairman of the board is also the same age category. So, and both of those came up out of the youth branch at NAACP, and then the college
promoting
chapter.
From within.
So they've been involved with NAACP since the very early years. What have it changed is about the critical piece is the communication. Okay. We tweet. We're on Facebook.
Right. I think I befriended them on Facebook.
Yeah, we believe in electronic media that most of the young people are using today. And the national office uses it very effectively to make sure that we can communicate with a segment of the population who really thought that NAACP was a dinosaur and a museum relic.
Well, and I must admit, I was one of those people. I remember went to the website and I said, wow, this is really up to date and really kind of new looking, because I think a lot of people, when they think of the NAACP, the first thing that pops into my mind is something like Brown versus Board of Ed, or you think a lot of the old court cases and things. But the NAACP has done a lot more recent things. One of the things I saw on the website were the sisters that were recently released from prison. I think it was Texas. Mississippi, right. Yeah. So that was the first page on the yes. national website. So you are keeping really up to date with what's going on.
As a matter of fact, we had our convention last year in July in Kansas City, and one of the highlights of the convention was the activities we were doing in our prison branches throughout the nation and throughout Missouri. And everybody from across the nation came down to the convention early, and they went to visit some of the prisons in our state, Missouri, and see some of the great work we were doing there. And the chairman of the prison branch for the state of Missouri, that activity is my first vice president here in St. Louis.
So we actually have a prison branch.
We have prison branches, yes.
Okay, so what does that entail?
It operates like a normal branch anywhere else, with the exception that it tries to focus on bringing some human rights issues that are impacting the prison population to light, so that we can get the information directly from those people being impacted, and then do what we need to do on the outside to make sure that city, state, and the federal government are more responsive to the needs of those incarcerated. Of course, you know, from a percentage standpoint, right. African Americans are more incarcerated more than everybody else. So it brings in, rises to a level for us as NAACP that we really need to be involved and really need to take a look at what's going on.
Well, do you find with this new national leadership, is there a renewed sense of urgency around issues, I guess, in the African American population and around human rights in general? Because I think that's one of the things that's been lacking. You know, it's kind of sad that the same problems we had in 1914 we're having now in 2011. Is that sense of urgency renewed in the organization, do you think?
Yeah, there's a sense of urgency on a national level, and truly, I just became president of the local branch, and there's a sense of urgency locally here. You know, my wife's a genealogist, and I picked up some of her letters where she interprets slave letters.
Oh, okay.
And I would read them, and had the broken English in there and all the other things. And I got them mixed up with some complaint letters that came into the branch. Okay. And I thought I was reading a complaint letter from somebody in today's time, when I'm reading a letter from somebody right out of a slave right out of Reconstruction in 1890 who wrote it to somebody else. And I looked at it, and the thing that I saw more than anything was the fact that the educational level was similar, and the complaints or the issues that were prevalent then or prevalent now. And at that point in time, I knew that we really have a significant problem, and a sense of urgency to bring some relief to the African American community here in St. Louis and the St. Louis metropolitan area.
Well, when you go to your national conferences, are you finding the same thing from your urban counterparts around the country, like they're having very similar issues, or are their issues any different than ours?
Problems are the same. When the downturn in the economy occurred, unemployment rose. Unemployment for everybody else is at 12%. For African Americans, it's 150% times that number, especially for young African Americans in urban areas. So yes, and it's that way all across the country, whether it's a urban population center or some rural community.
What is the NAACP doing to help people in this economy? I assume there are some type of jobs programs, or is, again, emphasizing the importance of education, because that's what's going to help get you ahead?
Well, strategically, we try to focus more on those folks and those entities that have a responsibility and a mission. Okay. to bring some sort of resolvement to the problem, such as in St. Louis it would be SLATE, St. Louis Agency on Training and Employment. In some cases, as relates to those employers who happen to be doing some hiring, to look at their hiring practices, city government, federal and state government. We need to refocus our energies on those folks who have the funding, the training, and the expertise to deal with the problem and make sure they're doing it in a fair and balanced way.
Right, and advocacy. I mean, I think that's really great to hear from an organization, because I think so many organizations try to do the work, but they may not actually be the experts at the work. So instead of the NAACP trying to set up their own job training program or other types of programs, your job is really more to advocate and put the pressure on organizations like SLATE and other ones that may provide job training for individuals to make sure they're doing it in the correct fashion.
Yeah, absolutely right. And to look at some of the laws and regulations on the books to make sure that those agencies that were in charge of compliance are doing their job, that the budget cuts and the downturn in the economy hasn't resulted in them losing resources, and that loss of resources meaning loss of personnel. Loss of personnel means less compliance.
Right.
Less compliance means more people of color falling through the cracks.
Right, and I think that's what happened. As you know, the last one hired, first one fired. Absolutely. So you'll have a lot of people with lower skills being let go, and then there's no recourse for them to be able to find additional work. That's
exactly what's going on. That's exactly what's going on. I think the other side of the coin is that, you know, Melanie, I put it this way. I was talking to somebody last week, and I told them that the condition of St. Louis is poor, whether they are African American, a majority, or Hispanic, or whatever you want to call them. Those conditions that we, as the oldest and one of the largest civil rights organizations in the country, we had a responsibility to make sure that the resources that were made available got into their hands. Right. We had a responsibility to make sure that none of those disparities existed. Somewhere along the line here in St. Louis, we reached a point where we didn't focus as much on those issues as we should have, and we became, to some degree, more of a social organization. You know, but that ends. We're a civil rights organization, and we're going to be a very aggressive civil rights organization.
Well, and that is great to hear. It sounds like your role as president, you're really going to work on refocusing the organization and bringing some new programs and some ideas to the organization and to the city.
Yeah, and we're going to look at it, well, I call it re-engineering our thought process. We're going to look at it from a different perspective.
Great. Well, when we come back from break, I look forward to learning more about your plans for the city of St. Louis and for the NAACP, and we will talk about it in a few minutes.
Sure.
Why do people think there's more disagreement in the state legislature than in most families? My brother and I argue about everything, even which TV show to watch. Mom says our elected officials debate important